So the Toronto Raptors have been excellent this season, but I do think there are small things with the team right now that could end up being exposed in the playoffs. Those things specifically being the fact that the team has actually been quietly struggling from outside, besides like Danny Green and Kawhi is starting to get it together. Number two, the fact that there's only really one dude on this team who can just get you a bucket out of nowhere. I mean, give Kyle Lowry credit. His playmaking has been awesome, and he can still do stuff in the pick and roll, and occasionally he can isolate, but, I mean, Kawhi is just really the only guy who can do that. And then number three is, I think Jonas Valanciunas, for as good as he has made himself, even in the modern NBA the past couple of years, I do think he still has a problem defending the bigs who go all the way out to the three-point line. And the Eastern Conference has a couple of those. One is Brook Lopez, the other one is Al Horford. So it might make sense to get a 5 who can deal with those dudes a little bit more. And I'll go into detail about this a little later, but I will say this now. I know they're starting Siakam and Ibaka, but those two make this team one of the worst defensive rebounding teams in the league, which means you may have a need at some point to put a better rebounding 5 in there. And if Valanciunas is your answer, then of course teams can attack him because of spacing and all that. So let's dive into all this. We'll start with the shooting. So Serge Ibaka shooting like 28% from 3. Pascal Siakam, I mean, he's showing life from 3, that's good, but I think it's safe to say he's not there right now. With his slow release and not always being super comfortable shooting the 3, and I mean, teams are going to dare him to shoot, they just are. We've got OG Anunoby, who's definitely not a natural three-point shooter right now. He's shown some signs throughout his young career. I'm not saying he's bad, but, you know, right now he's shooting 30%, and last year he was better, but he only shot about 3 a game. So he's definitely not a knockdown kind of a guy. CJ Miles, who's supposed to be like the shooter of the bench, is not making his shots at all, and he really has not been that good of a three-point shooter in the playoffs for the majority of his career, although he was pretty decent this previous year. We've got Norman Powell, who has never really been able to look that comfortable offensively. I mean, last year he was not good, and sure, he's making his threes right now, but I think it's fair to fear that that's not going to be the case all season. Fred VanVleet's even had trouble with his outside jumper, and I do expect some of these things to turn around, right? And if I didn't mention Serge Ibaka, he's shooting 28% as well. So, yeah, you would expect some of these things to fix themselves, especially Ibaka. But if they don't, then I think it could make sense for this team to go out and get somebody who can make some outside shots, right? Because teams are going to be loading up on Kawhi and Lowry, and I think there's just enough guys on this team who are not great shooters or are struggling at the moment to where you just may need one more guy, right? Now, there are some guys who could become available. The thing is, could you really get them, right? Because one thing with Toronto is the 2 contracts that you have that could make the money work are CJ Miles and Norman Powell, but both of them have at least one more year left in their deal. So I don't know if teams would be really comfortable with taking them on, which means you may have to wait for a buyout guy, and if that's the case, then, well, you're going to have to wait a little bit. But if you want someone who's attainable right now, I mean, there is Wayne Ellington of the Miami Heat. He's on a 1-year deal. I think you can get him, and, he can knock down shots, of course, for you. There's also Joe Harris, who the Nets do like a lot, but if you attached some other compensation, maybe they'd be down for that one. Courtney Lee is out there with the Knicks. He just played his first game. He's a better defender than a lot of the other guys I'm naming here, but he also makes about $12.5 million a year, so it might be a little trickier to, trade for him just because he makes a little bit more money, but, it's a possibility, I guess. There are definitely dudes out there. I mean, hell, there's Damari Carroll also, if we're going to talk about the Nets making $15 million a year. As long as you get one guy, I don't know who that one dude is, but just somebody who can be a three-point shooter, and if he can give you some defense as well, that would be nice. I should mention Carroll's three-point shooting has not been too hot this year, so yeah, just someone like that. Just picture any of those guys. There's other guys in the league as well. So those are a couple options. If we look at the idea of getting another scorer in here, someone who can create their own shot and just be like that third dude who can make stuff happen, I don't totally know. I have one crazy idea and one that is perhaps a little bit more realistic. So The Rockets are having a tough time this season, okay? And I could picture them wanting to shake it up in some way. Is Eric Gordon attainable? Sure, he's struggling right now, and you could argue that he's too much of a chucker, but we all know how good he's been for Houston, and he was still a knockdown shooter for the Pelicans. It's an idea, I guess. He can give you a little bit more scoring punch than Courtney Lee can. We saw Alec Burks get moved to the Cavaliers recently, and if you fast forward 60 days, that is still before the trade deadline. So if he proves to be an offensive option for the Cavs, maybe the Raptors could think about that one. Those are the only two that I really think of off the top of my head, but we assume somebody could be available, someone who could just give them a little bit more scoring, maybe create their own shot. Maybe that's too much to ask for, I don't know. But, you do still have some tradable contracts here between like the Norman Powell deal and CJ Miles, like I mentioned. Now, the last one is the center position. So, moving Ibaka to the 5 has been a good idea. Okay, it's worked out. It's made the team way more athletic. It's opened up the offense and all that stuff. However, there are little teeny fears with doing that. Number one, when Siakam and Ibaka are out there together, these guys, they are one of the worst defensive rebounding teams in the league. And you have to imagine that if you were to move Siakam to the center position and then have your, Lowry, Danny Green, Kawhi, OG, Siakam, or maybe it's Van Fleet, maybe it's CJ Miles, whatever, you have to assume that that lineup would be even worse rebounding-wise, because for as good as Siakam is, he is a thin dude, right? So you say, okay, well, Valanciunas can be our answer to that, right? One of the better rebounders in the league, all that good stuff. Now, I do agree, but of course, Valanciunas is not the best defender in space. He's definitely gotten better, give him credit. But I still think he could have some problems. I mean, Brook Lopez is knocking down threes like a crazy person right now. So if the Bucks and the Raptors end up in a playoff series, Valanciunas may not be playable. And if you have to have Ibaka and Siakam dealing with Giannis just attacking the boards every single possession, then that could be the difference in, a series that you could win in 6 games going 7. That could be the difference in losing a series because maybe Giannis is just that good. Who really knows? But I do think this matters because one of the reasons why the Rockets took the Warriors to 7 games and could have beaten them in that game 7, besides Iguodala being hurt, of course, is the offensive rebounding, Even if the numbers on that series looking back are not as drastic, it was definitely still a thing. So how did the Raptors deal with this? I mean, here's the thing. There's not a whole lot of centers out there who are available who are great rebounders and then also can defend in space, because if they exist, they're getting paid a lot of money. But, look, Dwayne Dedmon's out there, man. Okay, the Hawks are 5-20. I have to assume that if you included some seconds and whatever else and, made the money work with your contracts, you could probably get the guy. And I think he could be the exact type of backup 5 that the Raptors could really use. Now, Robin Lopez is also available. He's definitely got the defense. I don't think he really has the rebounding chops. So yeah, that's where I'm at. Basically, I think the Raptors may need to make a move for either another knockdown shooter. Also, I mentioned Courtney Lee. Trevor Ariza is definitely an option as well. I'm surprised I didn't think of him right away. Something like that, or just a better backup 5 in case Valanciunas can't be played against the best teams in the East. Maybe a dude who can create his own offense a little bit. I don't know. They might need none of these things because the team's just that good, but I'm just thinking,